This isn't just a story. It's a journey, one that'll stay with you long after the video ends. So if you've ever felt love, loss, betrayal, or hope, then stay with us. Because this story deserves to be heard from the very first second to the very last. If this video moves you, even for a moment, please give it a like. Leave a comment telling us which part hit you the hardest, and share it with someone who needs to feel something real today. And if you love stories that are raw, emotional, and unforgettable, then subscribe to the channel. Because we don't just tell stories here. We bring them to life. No watches, no chains, no flash, just wide-eyed curiosity and the kind of wonder that only exists in those whose dreams haven't yet been crushed by the world. They parked their bikes near the front steps and walked through the glass doors, which parted with a soft whoosh. Their faces lit up immediately, drinking in every curve and shimmer of the automotive masterpieces in front of them, sleek designs, oversized wheels, gleaming emblems. They didn't run. They didn't touch anything. They simply stood there, marveling. One of them finally turned to his brother and whispered, "That's it. That's the one." He pointed at a deep midnight blue hypercar that looked like it had rolled off the cover of a magazine. It was speed sculpted into metal, one of only a handful in the country. The price tag? Well, over $900,000. As they moved closer to get a better look, a sharp, clipped voice cut through the air. "Can I help you?" The boys turned. A salesman in a perfectly tailored navy suit approached, adjusting his cufflinks. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine, and his hair was gelled just enough to seem effortless. He was everything the boys weren't: refined, well-dressed, smug. He looked them over slowly, first their worn clothes, then their battered sneakers, then back to their faces. "I'm sorry," he said, lips curling into a smirk, "but I think you're in the wrong place." One of the boys blinked. "We were just wondering if these vehicles start at $900,000, the salesman interrupted, emphasizing each word like he was explaining something to a child. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable elsewhere." Behind him, a few other employees chuckled under their breath. A couple seated at a desk nearby glanced over and gave each other a small, patronizing shake of the head. The boys' smiles faded. The younger one looked down. The older gave a polite, slightly awkward nod. "Sorry to bother you," he muttered, turning toward the door. They walked out slowly, their shoulders just a little lower than when they had entered. The glass doors whispered shut behind them. They got back on their bikes. And that should have been the end of it. She handed them brochures, pointing out what each part meant. They listened intently, asking thoughtful questions, not about the price, but about the engineering, the design, the legacy behind the brand. She noticed how most people didn't even care about those things. "Do you want to sit in it?" she offered. Their eyes widened. "Seriously?" one asked. She nodded, carefully, respectfully. The boys took turns sitting inside the car. No wild movements. No selfies. Just quiet appreciation. When they stepped out, she handed them her business card. "If you ever have more questions, you can call me directly," she said with a smile. "You're always welcome here." They thanked her with a mix of humility and awe, then rode away, this time with their heads held a little higher. The sales floor returned to normal. The smug salesman from earlier leaned over to a coworker and muttered, "Wasting her time." She heard him, but she didn't care. Something about those boys stuck with her. Maybe it was the way they asked questions most adults didn't. Maybe it was the quiet confidence they carried beneath the awkwardness. Or maybe it was just the simple fact that they reminded her of a time when she had been underestimated too. The day ended. Lights dimmed. Doors locked. But the story wasn't over. A mansion sat at the edge of a private hillside estate where the world grew quieter. And the skyline wasn't something to chase. It was something to gaze at. With expansive glass walls, sleek architecture, and manicured gardens, it was the kind of home that whispered wealth instead of shouting it. The late afternoon sun painted the interior in shades of gold and amber. Light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, touching the polished marble floors and the custom artwork adorning the walls. The stillness inside was elegant, intentional, like every corner had been curated, not lived in. Then the front doors opened. Two teenage boys stepped in, their sneakers thudding softly against the floor as they carried the weight of something heavier than a bad day. Combat shorts, plain white tees, and lingering silence followed them into the foyer. The older brother closed the door behind them and paused, his fingers tightening around the straps of his backpack. The younger one took a deep breath, then exhaled through his nose, as if still trying to shake the feeling off his skin. "Where's Dad?" he asked, voice low. "Probably in the study," the older replied. "Come on." They walked past the modern chandelier that hung like a floating sculpture, past the hallway where classical piano music often drifted, and turned into a side wing. At the far end of the hallway sat a set of heavy oak doors, open just a crack. Inside, their father sat behind a grand piano, the kind you see only on stages or in mansions like this one. He wasn't playing, just sitting. The lid was open, and a tumbler of something amber rested on the corner, untouched. He wasn't the kind of man you interrupted, not out of fear, out of respect. He carried presence like other men carry wallets, always with him, never forced. He looked up as his sons entered. "Back already?" he asked, voice calm, eyes unreadable. The boys nodded. He studied them for a moment longer. "Everything all right?" The older brother opened his mouth to say, "Yes," the automatic response, but stopped. "No," he said quietly. "Not really." Their father motioned to the leather armchairs near the fireplace. "Sit." The boys dropped their bags and sank into the seats. For a moment, silence filled the room like mist. The father swirled the drink in his glass, then set it down without taking a sip. He turned his chair slightly toward them. "Tell me what happened." "We just wanted to look at the car we'd seen online," the older brother began. "We weren't messing around. We were polite, just curious." "Then what?" their father asked. The younger brother took over. "One of the salesmen looked at us like we were dirt. He basically told us to leave. Said we were in the wrong place. He even laughed and said the car started at $900,000. He looked down at his hands. People around us laughed too. It was embarrassing. The words settled in the air like smoke. No one moved. The older one quickly added, "There was a woman who worked there. She saw us and came over after the others brushed us off. She was actually nice, showed us the specs, handed us brochures, treated us like we mattered." Their father leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight. His expression didn't change. No flash of anger, no furrowed brow, just calm focus. "Did she know who you were?" he asked. The older brother shook his head. "No, we didn't say our last name." "Smart," their father murmured, more to himself than to them. There was a pause. Then the younger one asked quietly, "Why do people treat you differently based on what you're wearing?" Their father looked over at him. "Because people often confuse appearance with value," he said. "And that tells you more about them than it ever does about you." The boy nodded slowly, chewing on the thought. Then, silence returned to the room. Their father stood and walked to the window, staring out at the sunset as it dipped toward the horizon, hands clasped behind his back. For a long time, he said nothing. Then, without turning, he spoke. "Thank you for telling me." That was it. No fury, no immediate action. Just 5 simple words, spoken with such composed clarity it somehow made the moment feel heavier. The older brother looked at the younger one, unsure what to say next, but there was nothing left to say. They had shared their story, and their father had heard it, not with outrage, but with attention. And somehow that was enough. Dinner that night was unusually quiet. The long mahogany dining table stretched far too wide for just 3 people, but the family always sat close together. Plates were set with precision. The chandelier above cast a soft glow over the silverware and stemware, while subtle jazz played through the ceiling speakers. The brothers picked at their food, glancing occasionally at their father. He ate like he always did, slow, methodical, present. At one point, the older brother cleared his throat. "You're not mad?" Their father didn't look up from his plate. "At whom?" he asked. "The salesman? The people who laughed?" He gently set his fork down, then looked up. "I don't waste anger on people who show me who they are," he said. "I pay attention, and then I act when it matters." He went back to his meal. After dinner, the boys headed to their rooms upstairs. As they passed each other in the hallway, the younger one turned to his brother. "Do you think he'll do something?" The older one smiled. "You don't know Dad by now." The next morning would bring an answer they never expected. Downstairs, in the privacy of his study, their father made a quiet phone call. "Yes," he said into the phone. "I need both cars delivered here by 8 a.m. tomorrow. No delays." He paused, listening. "No, not the usual delivery. Have the drivers wait outside the dealership. I want the timing to be precise." Another pause. Then softly, "It's time they remember not everyone who looks ordinary is." He ended the call, set the phone down, and leaned back in his chair. His sons had been judged by what they wore. Now he was about to remind the world that real power doesn't announce itself, it simply arrives. One of the cars had rose gold accents that shimmered in the sun like champagne and crystal. Together, the 2 cars were worth well over $50 million, and yet the way they arrived, it felt like money wasn't even the point. It was about presence. Heads turned instantly. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. A young couple touring the showroom paused as the man slowly lowered his sunglasses. A customer in the lounge spilled his espresso as he rushed toward the window. Even the cleaning staff halted mid-mop, eyes widening in disbelief. Phones came out. Whispers spread. "Is that a boat tail?" "No way. 2 of them." "Who the hell are they?" Staff and customers swarmed to the massive glass front of the dealership like moths to a flame. Some stared in silence. Others recorded in shock. No one dared move closer. Then the doors opened. From the back seat of the royal blue boat tail, 2 teenage boys stepped out, wearing the exact same combat shorts and white t-shirts they had worn the day before. Their presence was calm. Not cocky, not flashy, just centered. They looked around like they'd been there before. And they had. Only this time, they weren't asking permission to admire the cars inside. They walked to the front of the black boat tail, just as the second rear door opened. And then he stepped out, their father. He was dressed in a sharply tailored dark gray suit, the kind that made its own statement without a brand logo. His posture, flawless. His expression, unreadable. His pace, unhurried. He adjusted his cufflinks, not for show, but because he expected precision in every part of his life. The moment his feet touched the dealership pavement, everything shifted. He didn't walk in. He arrived. Inside, the arrogant salesman from the previous day saw them. He had been laughing with a coworker just moments earlier, retelling the story of the two scruffy kids who thought they could afford a $900,000 hypercar. Now, the laughter caught in his throat. His eyes widened. He stared at the boys, then at the man walking behind them. Recognition hit like ice on his spine, then fear. He tried to compose himself, wiping his sweaty palms on his pants, adjusting his tie, straightening his posture. His smirk disappeared the moment he met the father's gaze. But it was too late. He never saw it coming. The glass doors opened as the trio stepped inside. The entire atmosphere in the showroom thickened. The once buzzing crowd instinctively parted, like royalty had entered. The father walked to the reception desk, his sons just behind him. Calm, collected, controlled. "I'd like to speak to the staff member who assisted my sons yesterday," he said to the receptionist. The woman behind the desk looked stunned. She blinked. "Why, yes, sir. One moment, please." The arrogant salesman quickly stepped forward, his voice suddenly upbeat. "Sir, that was actually me." The father cut him off with a single look. "No," he said coldly. "You weren't the one who helped them." The man faltered. "But The father turned away and looked to the dealership manager, who had been cautiously observing from behind a glass office wall. "I believe your security cameras recorded yesterday's interactions?" he asked. The manager nodded slowly. "Yes, sir. We archive everything." The father's voice was calm but firm, loud enough for every staff member nearby to hear. "Then I suggest you review the footage before this conversation continues." Without another word, the manager vanished into his office. The silence that followed was deafening. Staff whispered among themselves, realizing exactly who these boys were. But the teenage brothers said nothing. They stood still, side by side, no longer humiliated, no longer dismissed. In this moment, they weren't the children of a billionaire. They were simply young men whose dignity was about to be restored. 5 minutes later, the manager returned. His face was pale. He avoided eye contact with the salesman. "We reviewed the footage, sir," he said clearly. The father raised an eyebrow. "The staff member who assisted your sons yesterday was Emily Torres," the manager confirmed. "And this man," the father asked, gesturing toward the now visibly sweating salesman. The now visibly sweating salesman stood frozen as the manager cleared his throat. He misrepresented the interaction. The manager said his behavior was inappropriate and unprofessional. The father turned slowly toward the salesman. "You judged my sons the moment they walked in," he said, his voice steady. "Not based on who they were, but on what they wore." The salesman opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. "You laughed at them, mocked them, turned your nose up because you assumed they didn't belong." The father paused. "And the irony is, you don't belong here." The manager stepped forward again. "Effective immediately, you're terminated." Gasps rippled through the showroom. The salesman didn't argue. He didn't beg. He simply lowered his head, collected his things, and walked out right past the very boys he once thought were a waste of his time. The father turned back to the manager. "Bring me Emily." Moments later, the woman who had spoken kindly to the boys the day before walked out, confused and cautious. When she saw the boys, her face lit up with recognition and concern. "Is everything okay?" she asked gently. The father smiled for the first time. It was subtle but genuine. "More than okay," he said. "You treated my sons with respect. You took the time to listen. You gave them attention when no one else did." She blushed slightly. They were polite, smart. It was a pleasure. He nodded, then pointed toward the hypercar they had admired the day before. They told me they liked that one. The showroom fell completely still. I'd like to purchase it, he said, turning back to her. Fully loaded. Every feature they mentioned. Add it. Her eyes widened. That's over $3 million, she said softly. He pulled out a pen. Then make it $3.10 and make sure the full commission goes to you. He signed the paperwork on the dealership's main counter, right where the arrogant salesman had laughed the day before. That moment became more than just a transaction. It was a lesson, a reckoning, a reminder. As the paperwork was finalized, the teenage boys looked around the room at the same people who had judged them, laughed at them, dismissed them. Now, those same people stood silently. Their expressions were a mix of shame and awe. The father stepped back, holding out the keys to his sons. Happy early birthday. They took the keys with quiet pride. No cheers, no bragging, just quiet victory. They walked back outside to the boat tails. But this time, not as the underestimated, but as the unexpected. And as they drove away, all that remained behind was silence, and a story no one at that dealership would ever forget. The engine purred like a sleeping lion as the sleek $3 million hypercar rolled away from the dealership's curb. The sunlight danced along its curves, catching flecks of polished chrome and deep, lustrous paint. Behind the wheels sat a composed man in a tailored suit, still and powerful, as if the car moved because he allowed it. In the back seat, his two sons sat in quiet awe, holding keys that meant far more than horsepower. The car disappeared down the tree-lined road, swallowed by the distance. The sound faded. The moment settled. Inside the dealership, silence lingered like the echo after a thunderclap. Employees who had laughed the day before now stood speechless, frozen in the wake of what had just happened. A few still held their phones, now forgotten in their hands. Others simply stood with expressions of quiet disbelief, shaken not by the money, but by the meaning behind it. The manager watched from behind his glass office wall, arms folded, his jaw tight, with regret. This wasn't just a sale. It was a statement, a moment that would ripple across that dealership and far beyond for years to come. The customer, who had once smirked when the boys were dismissed, now lowered his gaze. The junior salesperson who had laughed along rubbed the back of his neck, shifting uncomfortably. Even the janitor, who had stayed out of the drama entirely, shook his head in silent respect. They had all witnessed it, the transformation, the twist, the truth, and they would never forget it, because in the end, this wasn't about a car.